So we just reviewed squares and square roots in solving equations. And on the left-hand side, I have written an assignment for you to practice. Now, in this next section, when we talk about the Pythagorean theorem, we're actually going to encourage you to use calculators because we want you to understand the concept. And so on this page, if you can do some of the work without a calculator, fantastic. But if you need to use a calculator to do squaring and square roots, that is perfectly fine too. So what we'd like you to do at this time is pause this and write down the problems. And I am going to, after you finish pausing, I'm going to do the problems. So here we go. 2 squared is 2 times 2 is 4. 7 squared, 7 times 7 is 49. 13 squared, 13 times 13 is 169. 4.1 squared. Well, if I had a calculator, I could plug it in. Otherwise, I can just do this. I know 1 times 1 is 1. I carry 4 times 1 is 4. And I end up getting 16.81. 2.5 squared. Again, you can use a calculator or not. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 2 is 10 plus 2 is 12. 2 times 25 is 50. And you end up getting 6.25. 1.2 squared. If I use a calculator, I know that 12 times 12 is 144. So it actually ends up being 1.44. To find the square root of each number. The square root of 25, which number multiplied by itself is 25, that would be 5. The square root of 1 is kind of tricky. It actually is just 1. 1 times 1 is 1. The square root of 64, which number times itself is 64, that would be 8. The square root of 1.21 ends up being 1.1. The square root of 400, the square root of 4 is 2, the square root of 100 is 10, it turns out it's 20. The square root of 2.56 is 1.6. True or false? Is the square root of 36 equal to 6? Does 6 times 6 equal 36? True. Square root of 16 equals 8. Is 8 times 8 equals 16? False. Part of the reason I chose this one as a true-false is a lot of people want to divide by 2. 16 divided by 2 is 8, but the square root of 16 is actually 4. Square root of 99 is 9. A lot of people want to just call it 9 because they kind of split it in half, but the square root of 99 is 9 point something, really close to 10. It's not exactly 9, so I'm going to say false. The square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 1 is 1. That is true. Alright, so let's do some practice with our inverse operations. Here we have 2x minus 5 is 21. My first step will be to add 5. That's the inverse of subtracting. So we have 2x equals 26. The inverse of multiply by 2 is divide by 2. I get x equals 13. Here I have x divided by 2 plus 4 equals 10. My first step will be to subtract 4 from both sides. I get x divided by 2 equals 6. This is x divided by 2. The inverse of division is multiply. I multiply both sides by 2. This gives me 2 divided by 2, which is 1x.
Can I get any available classified staff willing to help in the multipurpose
6
room?
times 2
Any available
is
classified
12.
staff in the multipurpose room for help? Thank you.
This background noise shows you that I'm doing this at school. 2x minus 10 equals 7. My first step is, when I see parentheses, I know is to use distributive property. I have 2x. This is like multiplying through a -1. Negative x or negative 1x. Negative 1 times negative 10 is positive 10. Next step is combine like terms. 2x and negative x is x. 2x minus x is x plus 10 equals 7. I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides. That's the inverse of adding. I get x equals -3. And finally, first step is distributive property. I see parentheses, so I'm going to distribute the 5 times x, and 5 times -1. Again, 5 times x is 5x, 5 times -1 is -5. I now, on this side, I'm actually going to skip to combining like terms. The -2 and the 5 are both constant terms. I am going to write my variable term first, and then my constant term. The next step is to move the variable. I am preferring positive numbers, so I'm going to move the 5x by subtracting it from both sides. That's the inverse operation. I get -5 equals 4x plus 3. My next step is to add or subtract to isolate the variable. I am going to subtract the 3 from both sides. I end up getting -5 minus 3 is -8. I then want to divide both sides by 4 because that's the inverse operation. -8 divided by 4 is -2. And we are now going to start the Pythagorean theorem tomorrow.